Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com for non-boxing picks. Also, Dwyer Sports Betting channel here on YouTube. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Well, more beer for us. Underdog Danny Jacobs delivered in emphatic fashion over Peter Quillin, getting a first round KO. Now let me say, I know there are times I come here online and I say, hey, this fight was stopped prematurely. This is not one of them. This is actually a fight where the referee had at least as good a night as Danny Jacobs, right? Excellent stoppage. Quillin gets caught with bombs and is staggering around the ring in a way that, in my opinion, and I know, if you look at the film, he doesn't stagger that long. But when you see him staggering after getting hit with a bevy of tough shots, unable to really throw anything substantive back, right? And when you look at his eyes, and that's what the ref is supposed to look at, you understood that this guy was in severe trouble. My point to you is, you're halfway through the first round. Peter Quillin is depleted, disoriented, right? And Danny Jacobs is 100%. In other words, Jacobs hadn't been worn down at all. He's fresh. He's barely been hit, right? And he's decimating the other guy who gets hit with a shot and does a little dance. Right? His legs aren't totally cooperating. I believe the referee saved a lot of damage to Peter Quillin. Right? If I were Peter Quillin, I'd feel grateful that the referee had my back. Right? That the ref has enabled me to continue my career. Right? I understand the crowd was upset. Right? I'm sure they came in and they thought, okay, we're going to get several rounds of great action. Right? This is the Battle of Brooklyn. Both guys have had the belt. Right? I'm sure they didn't want to leave with less than 3 minutes of action. But people need to understand that Peter Quillin was badly hurt. Just think about it in real life. If you see two guys fighting and one guy does an odd dance the way Quillin does after taking a lot of punishment and isn't throwing meaningful punches back, you would know that that guy's badly hurt. I applaud the stoppage, right? I know people are going to say, oh, Danny Jacobs' right hand. It's more than a right hand. The right hand causes the dance. But if you look at what Jacobs does, Jacobs is throwing a lot of punches, right? It's not just a lucky punch. No, Quillin is hurt badly before that last right hand has him do a dance, right? Quillin is lucky that as he did the dance, Jacobs didn't move with him, because in my opinion, he almost certainly would have been knocked out cold, right? I applaud the referee. A+ job by the referee. A+ job by Danny Jacobs. Now let me just say a couple of things, because I believe that perception sometimes is different than reality, right? Right now, Saul Alvarez, and I know there are many of you who feel that I'm a hater and that, I pick on Saul Alvarez. But right now, I believe the public believes in the superstardom of Saul Alvarez. Right? Now, Saul Alvarez just arrived at middleweight 5 minutes ago. Danny Jacobs has had the belt longer than Saul Alvarez has been a middleweight. Right? I'm just telling you that if a Saul Alvarez, Danny Jacobs fight is announced, and I understand the chances of that happening are slim because of the promotional groups involved, right? They're different promotional groups. But if a Saul Alvarez, Danny Jacobs fight is announced, you need to run to put money on Danny Jacobs, right? Jacobs is simply more athletic, moves better, right, than Saul Alvarez. Understand, there's an open question on whether Saul Alvarez can compete on a world-class level at middleweight. It's only in the microcosm that is boxing, right? And the biases we all have, the box office Saul Alvarez brings to the table, that folks don't realize that Danny Jacobs is not only the better athlete, in other words, better coordination, quicker, better body control, right? He's not only the better athlete, but understand he's much bigger. I mean much bigger than Saul Alvarez. He was just in the ring against one of the harder punchers in boxing, Peter Quillin, and you saw that Jacobs had no fear. Jacobs is throwing home run shots early in this fight, right? The fight ended early. Think about it. Jacobs is throwing home run shots before the fight ends early, right? I was listening to the Showtime telecast. Understand Showtime has some of the best people on boxing, right? I'm a huge fan of Paulie Malignaggi's. I'm a huge fan of Al Bernstein, who's been around for a long time, right? At one point on the telecast, people were talking about Danny Jacobs being a top 10, middleweight, right? Top 10. Folks, Danny Jacobs beats Canelo. He has a belt, right? I'll take Danny Jacobs over Andy Lee, right? I'll agree Billy Joe Saunders is a wild card, but let's face it, Saunders, who I'm picking over Lee, is a bit young, isn't he? Doesn't really have the punching power, does he? Right? So, let me say too, I don't know who wins a Golovkin Danny Jacobs fight, because Jacobs can operate outside the pocket if he needs to, right? Let's just say Golovkin hits hard, right? Golovkin hits harder than Jacobs. But there's an athletic component to the whole thing, right? And Golovkin is far more robotic than Jacobs, who's more of a natural, right? And so you really have to ask yourself, David Lemieux was in the pocket getting blasted with the jab. I'm just here to tell you that Golovkin jab wouldn't land on Jacobs, right? So the question would be, okay, well, would Jacobs slow down to allow Golovkin to hit him? Also understand too, as Golovkin comes forward, Jacobs would be throwing heavy ammunition back. You saw the kind of heavy ammunition that Jacobs throws in this Peter Quillin fight, right? So Jacobs isn't top 10 in the middleweight division, right? Jacobs might be the top of the middleweight division, right? The only two guys at middleweight who I see really challenging Jacobs would be Billy Joe Saunders, who himself is a natural, right? But who, again, is a young guy who doesn't quite seem to see the big picture, right? What was he doing after he jumps out to a lead on Chris Eubank, right? Does anyone know? I mean, big fight in Saunders' career, and he seems to curiously be taking rounds off, and he's too young to do that. Right? But the only guys at middleweight who really at this stage might challenge Jacobs are Golovkin and Saunders, in my opinion. Right? To the Canelo crowd, and I know you're vocal here online, trust me, I heard you loud and clearly when your man was awarded the win over Cotto. Some of you even tried to defend the scoring, if you could believe that one. Right? Okay, fine. In the comment section to this video, just tell all of us how Canelo would deal with the foot speed gap if he were to fight Jacobs. In fact, forget the foot speed gap. How about the athletic gap? There's a big athletic gap. And as you saw in this Quillin fight, Jacobs doesn't have to get too close to you to hurt you. He has the kind of power that carries. Let me say something else. And it's something I've believed for such a long time, that in the book, and I know it's dated, that I wrote several years ago that's on sale on Amazon. Yes, that's a shameless plug. I made the point that athletes who are steady in their weight, right? The middleweight who walks around at close to 160, right? The welterweight who walks around at close to 147 between fights, right? The fighter who can show up to training camp and whose primary focus isn't on hitting saunas and losing 15 pounds, but it's actually on his opponent and what he needs to do in the fight, right? In my opinion, the steady weight guys are the guys who have a decided advantage, right? Understand, in boxing, fans like us, we're just seeing a snapshot, right? When we look at a weigh-in, you see the guys at the weigh-in and they say, yes, he's here at 159 or 160, right? And you say, okay, great, he's ready. The myth in boxing is that he's ready, right? If you make weight, great. Now we can just focus on the fight. You know what? The reality, in my opinion, is there's a road that fighters travel to make that weight, right? If you go back and look at Bernard Hopkins' career, you're going to see he had several fights where he would come in at 158, not even 159 or 160. He'd come in at 158, 157, right? Because Bernard was training year round. He was one of those steady weight guys, right? So when you saw Bernard at a weigh-in, you understood, this is how he's living. We could have had this weigh-in 2 weeks ago, right? He's been on weight for this fight for some time, right? Now, Peter Quillin, people need to understand, he's what I call a size guy, right? Kind of like how Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. was at 160 pounds, right? You look at him, and he looks too big for the weight class. You understand that he really belongs at 168 or some other weight, right? Maybe 175. He really belongs at a higher weight, but has squeezed himself into middleweight because he feels his size is going to be too much for his opponent. Now, in my opinion, when you see a guy like that, you need to just assume that sooner or later his punch resistance is going to go, right? He can hire people. This is what's happening in boxing today. You go out and you hire these big-time nutritional experts, and they tell you, hey man, I can help you cut the weight for the weigh-in. Okay, fair enough, right? The guy helps you cut the weight, you're losing 8 pounds in a day or whatever, right? Because let's face it, these guys are losing a lot of weight in a very short period of time, because when the fight happens, they'll say, this is what he weighs tonight. And the guy in Chavez Jr.'s case, who weighed 160 yesterday, today is weighing close to 180. Right? I've seen that happen many times in boxing. Fighters gaining 15, 20 pounds in one day. So you know what's going on. Guys are hitting the sauna. Guys are fooling around with nutritionists who have them on legal diuretics and stuff like that. Guys are dumping water out of their body. So what you're seeing is an illusion. You're seeing a guy who really is, a super middleweight or a light heavyweight, somehow making weight at middleweight, right? But the joke's on that guy, isn't it? Because while I can hire some big-time nutritionists to give me substances that drains my body of water, and while I can hop on the scale and trick everyone into believing that I weigh 160, right? What I can't do is trick my brain. I'm telling you that the guys who yo-yo in weight, when they, get hit, their brain, even if the guy has been hydrating after stepping on the scale, and we've seen many a fighter step on the scale, here he's made weight, then immediately turn for a water bottle, right? We've seen many guys, watch weigh-ins after the guy leaves the scale. Many of these guys almost immediately turn to some guy in their camp who has a glass of water for them, right? I'm just telling you that a lot of these guys are hurting big time in punch resistance. Because if I take water out of my body, right, there's damage done. I don't care if I've made weight or what. There's damage done. So even when I rehydrate, it takes a while for your body to get back to normal. Now I'll say this. I'm looking at this Danny Jacobs-Peter Quillin fight. Now keep in mind, Quillin's an interesting character because Quillin got dropped by Andy Lee. Right? You look at Quillin and you think, you know what, this guy looks like he's having a problem making weight. You just look at the size of guys. Right? It's almost like trying to believe Tony Bellew, who did a great job in Creed, was actually a light heavyweight when he filmed Creed, right? You see Creed and Tony Bellew and you say, how are these guys the same weight class? Well, it's the same thing here with Peter Quillin fights, right? You see a lean Danny Jacobs. He's lean, right? He looks like he was lean a week ago. He was lean 2 weeks ago. You could tell Danny Jacobs is an athlete who trains hard, right? Who's always in shape. Cancer survivor. Then you look at Peter Jacobs, and you're seeing a little softness, right? Kind of like Brandon Rios. You're seeing a little softness, and you look at the guy and you say, wow, this guy looks like he's enjoying New York City's restaurants, right? Suddenly he shows up and he weighs 159. He's thanking his nutritionist. That's another tip-off. Right? Guys who are a little bit too grateful to the nutritionist in their corner. Right? He's thanking his nutritionist. He's made weight. Okay, great. Here's the problem. Is his brain ready to take a punch? Right? Quillin used to have a great chin. He's now at the part of his career, right? A little bit older now, where his body is saying, look, man, we don't belong at 160. Remember that steak we used to have before you decided to drop a lot of weight at the last minute? Remember the diet both of us enjoy before you decided to drain yourself of weight at the last minute for this fight? Quillin's punch resistance really looked shaky, right? It was jarring seeing him after the last big shot in this fight. Let me say this too, right? In my opinion, Quillin is so weight drained, it's a little bit shocking. You see him against Andy Lee, right? He's dropped Andy Lee twice early, and Quillin just didn't seem to have the energy level to race across the ring, cut it off, and pin a hurt Andy Lee. Now I see him in this fight. Wasn't as cut as Danny Jacobs. Now, keep in mind, as I've said in other videos, I've seen guys who don't look cut, but yet you can tell they're athletes. Heavyweight Andy Ruiz right now, right? You can tell he's a guy who's there, right? He's going to, have faster hands than you and move better than you think. That's not Peter Quillin, is it? Right? If I were advising Peter Quillin, I'm just a guy here online, I'd have to tell him, hey, you know what? You need to go to 168. Right? Andre Ward's left the division. You need to go to 168. Right? Make yourself more in sync with your body, right? Let's put on the extra weight. It might actually add to your stamina, your ability to take a punch, right? Your ability to focus, right? I just don't think 160 is viable anymore for Peter Quillin, right? One of the sad truths in life is that, a lot of us gain weight as we get older, right? When you're in your 20s, you can get away with yo-yoing because your body's a bit fresher, right? You can, drop 8 pounds, 10 pounds, and then rehydrate, they call it. They even have a term for it. So by the night of the fight, you have the weight back, right? You can do that and your brain won't punish you as much as it will when you're Peter Quillin's age, right? Quillin gets hurt here, folks, it's over. The ref did him a favor. If that fight continued, I think it would have ended very badly for Peter Quillin, right? As it is, he gets to live another day. If I'm him, I would say, look, let's be real here. I need to gain weight. When Bernard Hopkins, who was always in shape at 160, gained weight to fight at 175, he literally skipped the 168 division, right? When he gained weight to fight at 175, he said in interviews after he beat Antonio Tarver that he couldn't believe how good he felt, right? His body just was fresher. That's because he stayed at middleweight too long. Quillin has stayed at middleweight too long, right? Let me say this too about Danny Jacobs. Don't sleep on this guy. I get the feeling that in boxing, right, some of the very best fighters are getting overlooked, right? A lot of people want my views on Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev. All right, I've heard you. Trust me, I've gotten your emails, right? Let me say this. If you really are thinking about the biggest litmus test for Andre Ward, perhaps you should consider the guy ruling where Ward once was at 168, James DeGale, right? Let me just say, DeGale's talent level is such. I understand DeGale is in his prime, doesn't have a reason to leave 168, and probably dominates 168 for at least the next 3 years, right? I understand that. I understand DeGale has made millions of dollars, understands there are millions more to be made at 168, right? What I want people to consider is the fact that Lucien Boutte fought Jean Pascal. DeGale just dismantled Lucien Boutte. Everyone in Canada knows who he is, right? And if DeGale gains weight to go to 175, I would take DeGale against practically everyone in that division. So if you're looking for a great fight at the highest level, right? If you want Ward tested, the fighter to do that would be James DeGale, right? At middleweight, let me say this. I know people are clamoring from a Canelo Golovkin fight, right? Folks, Golovkin has middleweight belts, right? That Lemieux fight was a unification fight. Danny Jacobs has a belt at middleweight. Why aren't we talking about Golovkin against Danny Jacobs? I can tell you that, in my opinion, Jacobs would be a much tougher matchup than Golovkin-Canelo, right? I would expect Canelo to get stopped by Golovkin, right? I don't really have a read on Jacobs against Golovkin, right? I don't. So all I'm saying to the boxing public is don't overlook the Jacobses and the DeGales of the world. You saw the talent level with Danny Jacobs in this fight against Peter Quillin, and think about it. Jacobs is so overlooked by the public that Jacobs was actually the underdog in this fight. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for stopping by.